Welcome to this presentation on sharing the Eucharist. Parish priests asked frequently by non-Catholics whether they can receive the Eucharist on special occasions, such as the first communion of a child, funerals of relatives and friends, and at weddings where one of the spouses is. People sometimes justify general sharing of the Eucharist, that the Eucharist is not only a sign of Christian unity, but also a means of bringing it about. They argue that by celebrating the Eucharist together, the cause of Christian unity would be promoted. It is also argued that the non-Catholic spouse in a mixed marriage is part of a domestic church and should receive communion in the Catholic Church whenever the spouse comes to Mass. It is argued that common participation in communion would support and nourish the sacramental union of the couple. The domestic church should not be divided and have the married couple and their children worshipping churches. There's the old adage or saying, the family that prays together stays together, and that has a lot of truth in it. Since many ministers in other churches encourage Catholics to receive communion, many people find it difficult to understand why the Catholic Church is so strict about issues like sharing the Eucharist with non-Catholics. We can come to understand the position of the Catholic Church through the Church's theology and tradition. The positions taken by the Apostolic See over the centuries expresses a tradition that gives us a context in which to understand the Catholic Church's stance in official theology and law today. The Chinese have a proverb, the first step towards wisdom is getting things by their right names. So I've got a few definitions. Intercommunion happens when two or more churches, through an agreement, decide that there's sufficient unity of faith to permit members of each church on a normal and permanent basis to receive the Eucharist in each other's church. Admission to communion happens when a church permits, under precise and determined conditions, members of other churches in certain cases to receive Holy Communion in the Catholic Church, as in the Directory on Ecumenism, number 55. For Catholics and for the Canon Law of the Church, full communion is described in the 1983 Code, in Canon 205. Those baptized are in full communion with the Catholic Church here on earth, who are joined with Christ in its visible body through the bonds of profession of faith, the sacraments, and ecclesiastical governance. Over the history, there's been lots of issues about sharing the Eucharist with people who aren't Catholics. So after there'd been a lot of issues in mission countries, the first code of canon law in Canon 731 said it's forbidden to administer the sacraments of the Church to heretics or schismatics, even when they err in good faith and asking for it, unless after having renounced their errors, they've been reconciled to the Church. Okay, we're used to talking about people who aren't Catholics as separated brothers and sisters, people not in full communion with the Church or in partial communion. But before Vatican II, it's important to remember the Church's law was very negative, and that's why words like heretics or schismatics were used prior to Vatican II. So heretics, there's an issue about their doctrines, or schismatics, there was an issue about them accepting church authority. Pope Pius XII wrote an encyclical way back in 1943, and he stated that the Church of Jesus Christ was the Catholic Church and identified this church as the mystical body of Christ. In this encyclical, the points were made that those who were baptized, professed the faith in its fullness, were in union with the hierarchy and faithful, that's the Pope and bishops, were fully members of the Church. Prior to Vatican II, being a baptized non-Catholic in good faith was not of itself a sufficient basis to receive the Eucharist. So the Church taught a conscious non-Catholic could not receive the Eucharist unless they rejected their error, made a profession of faith, and expressed sorrow. At Vatican II, on November the 21st, 1964, the Council issued the decree on ecumenism, which was a notable achievement in itself. It stated that for men and women who believe in Christ and have been properly baptized are brought into certain, though imperfect, communion with the Catholic Church. So instead of talking about people being heretics or schismatics, the Council's really saying from now on we should talk about degrees of communion. Baptism constituted the sacramental bond of unity among all believers. There were degrees of communion with the Catholic Church, and church membership was no longer either simply a question of being a member or not being one. Another document from Vatican II, the dogmatic constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, said in paragraph 14, fully incorporated into the Church are those who, possessing the Spirit of Christ, accept all the means of salvation given to the Church, together with her entire organisation, and who, by the bonds constituted by the profession of faith, the sacraments, ecclesiastical government, and communion, are joined in the visible structure of the Church of Christ, who rules her through the Supreme Pontiff and the bishops. So just as an example of what they're meaning by ecclesiastical government, we have in New Zealand, many other countries of the world, people who belong to the Pius X Church. So they have validly ordained priests, so they can celebrate the Eucharist, but they don't accept the authority of the Pope or the Second Vatican Council. So they are only in partial communion with the Church because they're not accepting ecclesiastical governance or the authority of the Church. Now, the dogmatic constitution on the Church and the decree on ecumenism acknowledged the existence of churches and ecclesial communities beyond the Catholic Church. So when they use the word ecclesial communities, that's another technical kind of phrase, but an ecclesial community doesn't have baptism. So when you become a member of the Salvation Army, there's a dedication at the flag. When you join the Ringatu Church, Ringatu's meaning upraised hand, so there's a dedication, and there isn't actually a baptism. So that's why they refer to ecclesial communities. Now, the churches that they're referring to with baptism, although separated from us, yet possess true sacraments, above all by apostolic succession, the priesthood and the Eucharist, whereby they are joined to us in closest unity. So that's a reference to people like the Orthodox churches. So most commonly we'd think of the Greek Orthodox, but there's Coptic Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. So all those churches they're separated from us, but their sacraments are valid. And we recognise all their sacraments. But there are 23 churches in full communion with us. So in New Zealand, we just tend to think about the Catholic Church or the Roman Catholic Church. But here in Auckland, there's Chaldeans that are in full communion with us. And sometimes we meet Lebanese people, and they might be Maronites or Melkites. They're in full communion with us. So there's not so many members of these churches in full communion with us in New Zealand, but the reality is there are 23 that are in full communion. Now, when people in churches that have valid ordinations and sacraments like the Greek Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, then some worship in common, communicatio and sacris, is possible given suitable circumstances and the approval of church authority. And so, following the first Ecumenical Directory in 1967, we can take part in liturgical worship or in the sacraments of these other churches, depending on the circumstances. And when we do, the liturgical worship is carried out according to the books, the customs of a church or community, celebrated by a minister of the church in his capacity as a minister for that church. But the Directory on Ecumenism goes on to say, sharing in liturgical worship is not to be considered as a means to be used indiscriminately for the restoration of unity among Christians. And it's recognised that for us not being able to share the Eucharist with some people who are in partial communion with the Church, Methodists, Presbyterians, Anglicans, is painful, but from the Church's point of view, that pain should push us to work even harder to bring about full communion, full unity with that Church. So, sharing of the sacraments is going to depend on the unity of the Church, which ought to be expressed, and that of sharing the means of grace. So, when we take the case of separated Western Christians who want to receive the Eucharist, they can, in special circumstances, when there's danger of death or an urgent need, such as imprisonment or during persecution. Now, the only one that applies of those here in New Zealand is danger of death. So, if you've got an exceptional situation, an Anglican is in hospital, they can't get the Anglican chaplain, then because the person's in danger of death, they could be anointed, receive absolution or communion from a Catholic priest in that exceptional situation of danger of death. And B, the separated Christian having no access to the minister of his or her communion, spontaneously asks the priest for the Eucharist and declares a faith in the sacrament that's in harmony with the faith of the Church and is rightly disposed. There is another for people who are for a long period of time are unable to receive the Eucharist. An example that used to apply in New Zealand was there was a Catholic priest on the Chatham Islands with a denomination there, so people could go for years without any celebration of the Eucharist by their church. So that constituted people being unable to receive over a long period of time. Now, that's all changed in recent decades because there are a number of clergy from a variety of churches on the Chatham Islands. So there isn't the need that used to exist of people being deprived of the Eucharist for a long period of time. Now, in our own time, there's millions of refugees all over the world, and so they constitute special circumstances, and many of them are deprived of the Eucharist in their church. So we don't have large-scale refugee issues here in New Zealand because they're not allowed into the country in big numbers, but in other countries it's very relevant. Now, the key canon in the Code of Canon Law dealing with sharing sacraments like the Eucharist is Canon 844, and the paragraphs deal with different situations. So paragraph 1 is establishing a basic principle that in the normal course of events, Catholic ministers give sacraments like the Eucharist to Catholic members of the faithful, and normally Catholic faithful are getting the sacraments from Catholic clergy. Now that paragraph includes those 23 churches that are in full communion with us. So I've been in Melbourne and I've gone along to the Maronite and the Melkite and the Chaldean churches and received communion in each of them because they're in full communion with us. Paragraph 2 addresses the situation of the Orthodox churches, so the Syriac, Greek, Romanian, Russian. These churches have validly ordained priests. All their sacraments are valid. We believe that Jesus is present in the Eucharist, everything in those churches. So Canon 844 paragraph 2 says, whenever necessity requires or a general spiritual advantage commends it, and provided the danger of error or indifferentism is avoided, Christ's faithful for whom it is physically or morally impossible to approach a Catholic minister may lawfully receive the sacraments of penance, the Eucharist, and anointing of the sick from non-Catholic churches, or non-Catholic ministers in whose churches these sacraments are valid. So, for example, you go on holiday to Greece, there isn't a Catholic church around, you can go to the Greek Orthodox Church, and so long as they're happy to give you communion, you can certainly receive it. It also means that, like in the tribunal, when we're dealing with a marriage case, the Orthodox churches require their faithful to be married and receive the blessing of the priest. So if someone, for example, lives in Moscow, they don't get married in the registry office, they don't go along to the Greek Orthodox Church to get married, we would say their marriage is invalid. It doesn't meet the requirement of form for marriage, just like we would say a Catholic getting married in the registry office in New Zealand is not meeting the requirement of form for marriage, and we would regard it as invalid. Now, Canon 844.3 says, Catholic ministers may lawfully administer the sacraments of penance, the Eucharist, and anointing of the sick to members of Eastern churches not in full communion with the Catholic Church if they spontaneously ask for them and are properly disposed. The same applies to members of other churches which the Apostolic See judges to be in the same position. So, if a Greek Orthodox person is fully able to come and receive communion in the Catholic Church. In paragraph 4, this is dealing with danger of death and being deprived of the sacraments for a long period of time, so there was a grave and pressing need. Catholic ministers may lawfully administer these same sacraments to other Christians not in full communion with the Catholic Church, who cannot approach a minister of their own community and spontaneously ask for them, provided that they demonstrate the Catholic faith in respect of those sacraments and are properly disposed. So that's the Anglican and hospital in New Zealand. Now, when the churches make arrangements amongst themselves, there's meant to be an agreement between the bishops and the church leaders about what's happening, and that's obviously common sense, that the churches work together, and when arrangements are made outside the sacraments, for example, like on Waiheke, where the Anglicans were using the Catholic Church, well, the agreement over the use of the church clearly has to involve the bishops of each church. In summary so far, the 1983 Code requires that the individual non-Catholics must be unable to approach their own community. The impossibility may be moral or physical, and the requirement for a long period of time is not in the final text of Canon 844. The non-Catholic must request the sacrament freely and on their own initiative. So just to say, well, physical impossibility, they just can't get to their own minister, or they can't locate him when they're seriously ill. A moral reason might be something like, for example, someone's been sexually abused by a minister in that church. They don't want to go near one, so that would constitute a moral reason to approach a Catholic priest. With the Directory on Ecumenism, the 1993 Directory was a more theological document than the 1967 one, and so there's more explanation about the reasons for decisions about sharing the sacraments. The document's easily available online and on the Vatican website. In number 129, the Directory says, a sacrament is an act of Christ and the Church through the Spirit, as well as being signs. Sacraments, most especially the Eucharist, are sources of the unity of the Christian community and of the spiritual life, and are means to building them up. Thus, Eucharistic communion is inseparably linked to full ecclesial communion and its visible expression. So, basically, the Church is saying people should be in full communion with the Church before they're receiving the Eucharist. The two go together. In the case of danger of death, Catholic ministers may administer these sacraments when the conditions below are present. It is strongly recommended that the diocesan bishop, taking into account any norms which have been established for this matter by the Episcopal Conference or the Synod of Eastern Catholic Churches, establish general norms for judging the situation of grave and pressing need and for verifying the conditions. In number 160, the directory says, although the spouses in a mixed marriage share the sacraments of baptism and marriage, Eucharistic sharing can only be exceptional, and in each case the norms stated above concerning the admission of non-Catholic Christians to Eucharistic communion, as well as those concerning the participation of a Catholic in Eucharistic communion in another church, must be observed. Pope John Paul II, about 10 years later, in an encyclical on the Church and the Eucharist, said, sharing communion presupposes that communion already exists, which entails communion in the teaching of the apostles, in the sacraments, and in the Church's hierarchical order. And as the name of the encyclical made clear, the Eucharist builds the Church, and the Church makes the Eucharist. So they're both intimately connected. After quoting the dogmatic constitution on the Church, number 44, Pope John Paul II explained, in a special way, since the Eucharist, as it were, the summit of the spiritual life and the goal of all the sacraments, it requires that the bonds of communion and the sacraments, particularly in baptism and priestly orders, be real. It is not possible to give communion to a person who's not baptized, or to one who rejects the full truth of the faith regarding the Eucharistic mystery. So baptism is the gate to the sacraments, and you have to be baptized to receive the Eucharist. In recent years, bishops in Germany have spearheaded a campaign to permit Protestants to receive the Eucharist regularly, and especially Protestants married to Catholics. In 2018, Pope Francis rejected this proposal directly. On May the 24th, 2018, Cardinal Laudari of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith again discussed the question with Pope Francis. Then he wrote, following these meetings, I'd like to bring to your attention the following points with the explicit approval of the Pope. 1, the multiple ecumenical efforts of the German Episcopal Conference, in a particular way the intense collaboration with the Council of the Evangelical Church of Germany, deserve recognition and appreciation. The joint commemoration of the Reformation in 2017 has shown that in recent years and decades, a foundation has been found that allows bearing witness together to Jesus Christ, the Saviour of all men and women, and working together in an effective and decisive way in many areas of public life. This encourages us to move forward with trust on the road of an ever deeper unity. Our conversations, so that's Cardinal Laudari and Pope Francis, showed that the text of the guide raises a series of problems of noteworthy significance. The Holy Father has therefore reached the conclusion that the document is not ready for publication. The essential reasons for this decision can be summarized as follows. The question of admission to communion for evangelical Christians in interconfessional marriages is an issue that touches on the faith of the Church and has significance for the universal Church. In other words, the Germans couldn't make a deal for themselves. The whole Catholic Church throughout the world's involved, and what the Germans do has to be in harmony with everyone else. This question has effects on ecumenical relations with other churches and other ecclesial communities that are not to be underestimated. The issue concerns the law of the Church, above all the interpretation of Canon 844. Since in a few sectors of the Church there are open questions in this regard, the dicasteries or the congregations of the Holy See have already been instructed to produce a timely clarification of these questions at the level of the universal Church. In particular, it appears opportune to leave to the diocesan bishop the judgment on the existence of grave and urgent necessity. For the Holy Father, it is of great concern that the German Episcopal Conference, the spirit of episcopal collegiality, should remain alive. As Vatican Council II has emphasized, the episcopal bodies of today are in a position to render a manifold and fruitful assistance so that this collegiate feeling may be put into practical application. The Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, again criticized an appeal by German theologians for intercommunion between Catholics and Protestants in a letter dated September the 18th last year. In a letter to Bishop George Batzing, President of the German Bishops' Conference, the Doctrine of the Faith said that the proposal did not do justice to the Catholic understanding of the Church, the Eucharist, and holy orders. The doctrinal congregation emphasized that significant differences in understanding of the Eucharist and ministry remained between Protestants and Catholics. It said that the doctrinal differences are still so important that they currently rule out reciprocal participation in the Lord's Supper and the Eucharist. So, there are many painful and difficult situations in parishes where there are celebrations of First Communions, weddings and funerals. Non-Catholic parents and relatives are often surprised that they're not given permission to receive the Eucharist. Strong theological arguments are made supporting the sharing of the Eucharist with non-Catholic spouses in mixed marriages, since the family constitutes the domestic church in Lumen Gentium. However, the domestic church is not a church in the way an ecclesial community can be a church, because Church involves clergy able to celebrate the Eucharist and the other sacraments, whereas a family at home can't do that, and in that sense they need to be part of the family of the parish, the diocese and the universal church. There have been consistent statements in principle that there's an essential link between ecclesial and church communion and being able to receive the Eucharist. The Catholic Church allows sharing the Eucharist with baptised non-Catholics only to meet a grave and pressing need of the individual non-Catholic and not to bring about intercommunion. While the sharing of the Eucharist is a difficult pastoral problem that many people make up their own minds about, the issuing of many norms does not solve all the problems. Delicate pastoral responses and more education about the reasons for the norms are necessary. Thank you.